But what about the personal problem of suffering? When we ask that question, why has God allowed this thing to happen to me, my family, my friends? Now, I'm very aware, I assume that there are lots of people in this room that have asked this question or are maybe asking this question right now. Perhaps something has happened in your life or something's going on in your life right now. And you are asking this question, why is it, God, that you have allowed me to suffer in this way, or people that I actually care for? And part of the implication behind it is that if you don't get a satisfactory answer to your question, well, what you're going to do then is reject God, or choose to have nothing to do with God, and just say, God, unless you answer my question, I don't want to know you. The question I think before us then is this, though. In relation to this personal problem of suffering, what ultimately is it that we're looking for? Is it an explanation, an answer to our questions? Or actually, what do we need fundamentally? Is it a solution? And in particular, does it make sense to reject God's solution simply because we haven't received yet the answer or the explanation that we want? Imagine this scenario. Imagine you leave here later on tonight after our discussion. You're walking down along Children. It's dark. And as you're walking down, some guy gets in a car from the top of the world. He's drunk too much. He's shooting down Long Children. And as he goes down, he veers off because he's drunk and he smashes into you. And you're lying there on the road with a broken leg in a lot of pain. Your friends call the ambulance, and the ambulance drivers come along and try to pick you up, stick you on the stretcher and put you in the ambulance to take you to the hospital. But imagine if instead of getting on that or being allowed to be lifted onto that stretcher, you say to the ambulance guys, no, I'm not going to get in your ambulance, I'm not going to get on your stretcher until someone tells me why this has happened to me. And so someone tells me why that guy was drinking in the pub and why he had to drive home this way and why he had to veer off the road at the particular place where I was walking down the pavement. Until I get an answer to any of those questions, I am not getting in your ambulance or on your stretcher. Now, it seems to me that if any of us actually did that, we would think that doesn't actually make sense. Of course, that guy may want, or you may want an answer to those questions. But does it make sense to refuse the solution until you've been offered an answer? And you see, I sometimes wonder if that's what it's like with us and God. We do have questions about why God has allowed this particular event or this particular thing to happen in my life. Now, in general terms, I think part of the answer is often, as I suggested earlier, to do with free will. But it is not the full answer. It is not a complete explanation. When I think about my dad and why he died of that brain tumour, that free will answer doesn't fully satisfy me or my heart. I still have questions. But the reality is this: even though I still have questions, what I don't do is reject the solution that God is offering me. And why is that? Or what is that solution? Well, fundamentally, it's to do with a relationship with God. A real, deep, personal relationship with God that helps us through our pain and suffering as we're experiencing it. It means that we're not going through it alone, but also a relationship with God that lasts until eternity, when we know there will be no pain, no suffering at all. That is the solution that God is offering us. And even though I've still got my questions and I still want the explanation, I at least find it doesn't make sense to reject God's offer of a solution just because in the meantime I haven't had the full explanation. And this is something that Margaret Mizzen discovered as well. I don't know if you remember this story. Jimmy Mizzen was a 16-year-old lad who got stabbed to death. I think it was about a year or so ago. And Margaret was a Christian. That's his mum. That was Jimmy there. Margaret was his mum. And in one of the interviews after this guy was stabbed to death, she was asked by a journalist, why aren't you angry with God? And this is what Margaret said. Because I just feel God's comforting arms around me, helping me get through this time. I don't choose to be angry with God because that's the way I choose it to be. Some people say, you call this a good God. He is a good God. People are expecting me to be angry, and I'm not. I can't even explain to you why. It's just this very calm feeling inside. Yes, my heart is breaking. And somehow I'll have to come to terms with it, but I'll only come to terms with it if I know that God is in my life. Here is someone who went through suffering that I can't even begin to imagine, losing a teenage boy. And yet, despite not having all her questions answered, she still carried on accepting the solution that God offered, which was a relationship with him now of peace and security and that promise of eternal life in the future.